like to call to order the August 3rd, 2023 Columbia Borough Council work session. Could I have a roll call, please?
Councilperson Zick.
Here.
Councilperson Kaufman.
Here.
Councilperson Stahl.
Here.
Councilperson Fisher.
Here.
Councilperson Price.
Here.
Councilperson Littner.
Here.
Councilperson Garner.
Here.
Mayor Lopes.
Would anybody like to offer an invocation? If you would like, please rise for a moment of silence. And Councilperson Regardless would like to lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Announcement of executive and information sessions. Following the meeting on July 25th, there was an executive session to discuss a potential lawsuit. Are there any additions, deletions, or reorganization of tonight's agenda needed? I don't think so. All right. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda as published?
Second.
I have a motion by Councilperson Kaufman, second by Councilperson Stahl, to approve the agenda as published. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Citizen comment on agenda items only. The first item we have is Frank Allen.
Thank you, Frank Alford, 1001 Ironville Pike. Hope everybody's in good health. Comment on the night out, which I thought was excellent. My dentist commented today on the fireworks. She really liked it, even though it wasn't dark. She said it brought some things out that usually they don't see. So with one exception to me, I love hot dogs, but I can't only eat them without onions. Had I known that you didn't have onions, I'd bought you a couple bushel. Now somebody would have had to cut them up and all, but anyway, I got some other comments here. I know the rules sometimes are different for me when it comes to the 5 minutes, so I'm just going to run through this stuff. If you get a chance to bring it out, I would appreciate it. Number one, I'd like to know why July 3rd the borough was closed. And I'll look for an answer maybe later on in the meeting. But, and also, I'd like to know what meeting that issue was talked about and at what meeting that was voted on.
What issue? For July 3rd?
Yes, at the time. Also, it was stated here at a previous meeting that the safety meeting was a private meeting. These people want to relook at that. You might be embarrassed. Just to let you know, I deal with stock and leader in York, and there's a difference of opinion in some of these issues. So just letting you know ahead of time. I'd like to ask, well, Evans is not here. I had a question for Evans. Does anybody know, if you'd like to answer this, how long Evans was studying or is practicing municipal law? Does anybody have an answer to that?
Oh, off the top of my head now.
Okay. Thank you. I guess sometimes I also would like to get the extra minutes. Like at the previous meeting, there was a citizen stood up, got 18 minutes on a 5 minutes on your agenda says 5 minutes. I know you like to hold me to 5 minutes, but what's the difference between this person and me? I try to find it, but I don't see it. I just see different people with different issues. I thank you.
There are no other sign-ups. Mayor Mills is not here, Chief Romer.
Just to continue with what Mr. Galdrick was saying about National Night Out, it was a wonderful evening. We couldn't have had any better weather. The turnout was tremendous. I can't, we'd be here all night if I listed all the people I had to thank, but I did want to just note a few. The emergency services, Columbia Fire, especially Boulderville, Pam Armour, for putting the entire event together, did a tremendous job. Wilson, Steve, Jake in Public Works, I mean, without them, you know, it would have been very difficult to pull off. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Chief, I forgot to get my bag of compost.
The next two of us, I didn't even know they were good enough.
Workshop items. The first item we have is the public meeting for the Walnut Street project. This is Derek's party.
Good evening, everyone.
That was very ominous.
With a PowerPoint prepared that was in your packet. As you all know, this has been a very, long and thought out effort for this project. We started working on this project back in 2019 when the borough applied for and received smart growth funding from Lancaster County. Over the next few years, we worked to define the scope of what we're going to utilize that money for. We partnered with YSM Architects out of York to create some visions for this street. I know that we've discussed this now at countless council meetings. We've had a post on the borough website advertising the project now for well over 3 years, I think. It's at least 2, I'll say, go on record. We did, it was about 1.5 years ago, had an initial public meeting to discuss this project before we got too far down the line. We held that down at Columbia Crossing and invited a lot of residents, and I actually see a couple of familiar faces, I think, from a few years ago. So just kind of lay the groundwork on kind of where we started and where we are now. So in the process of the project approval, because we are utilizing smart growth funding through the County of Lancaster, this is required to follow the PennDOT procedures for basically designing and bidding projects. That includes all of the clearances, all the plans, all of the product approvals, on and on that we need to do to meet that. So even though we've, again, discussed this project a couple of times, having a formal public meeting, albeit very appropriate at this point in the project, is also another requirement of the PennDOT submittal that we want to check off. So there is a sign-in sheet going around. That's not the sign-in sheet talk. I'd just like to know who's here so we can demonstrate to PennDOT that we adequately advertised this and discussed it and got some good participation. So if anybody has to sign that sheet, Julie has it. And I do have Julie Wolf here from the 2. I'll introduce her. Julie is on a contract with the county to help administer this grant funding as kind of the liaison between the borough and PennDOT. So it's been nice. I haven't had to deal directly with PennDOT. I've been able to deal with Julie, and we've been able to flush a lot of things out, a lot of issues, a lot of requirements, so that once this does go to PennDOT with a nice bow on it, we hope this will sail through without any issues. So, and thank you, Julie, for your help so far on the project and for being here this evening. Shall we go for a walk? So this project focuses on the 100 and 200 block of Walnut Street. So the section of Walnut Street that's bounded by Front Street and 3rd Street. And we have some pictures walking down the street. One of the things we've talked about a lot lately has been complete streets. It's been a It was a topic of last month's workshop meeting where we're talking about replacement of curb and sidewalks, and you do multiple projects around the borough where we try to address all aspects of the street, the utilities, the curbs, the sidewalks, the street trees, the stormwater, you name it. We try to do it all at once, and this is another goal and objective of this project. Okay, so one of the reasons we got the funding for this project was this is the corridor that connects our downtown, one of our greatest assets, with Columbia Crossings, another one of our greatest assets. With the redevelopment going on downtown, including the reopening of the Market House, which that's how far back I'm going. We wrote this grant. We were talking about how we're working to reopen this Market House. So now that we're here and established, we really felt the need to put some effort into this street because we know how many people come to Columbia Crossings on a daily basis and utilize the trails and utilize the facilities down here. And if you're not from the area or don't know Columbia, if you turn and kind of look up Walnut Street, there isn't really anything there to entice you to go further and explore, okay? It's not an ugly street, nothing wrong with it, no offense to anybody who lives on it, but we want to make it a gateway street so that somebody who isn't necessarily familiar with Columbia or anybody who is a resident of Columbia, make it easier for you to just connect the two dots. Hey, look at that. There's a really enticing looking street with street lights and trees and a bike lane, and we want to explore this a little bit more. Everybody down at River Park's on bikes. We've got bike racks around town. So when we look at prioritization of what we wanted this street to be, a big decision that the staff and council and everyone made is we normally prioritize cars when we design streets. This street, we're looking to more prioritize pedestrian and bicycle safety. Okay. So that led us to a big part of our design, which shouldn't be a secret to anybody in this room, but we're looking at putting a dedicated bike lane with a concrete island in the center. Now, the concrete island will have vegetation and whatnot, but it's very important to us to create a safe border so that people feel comfortable biking and walking, mainly up this street, but also down the street. Okay. So, a couple of the principles we utilize. Nice wide streets, one of my favorite views in the borough. When you turn and start driving down Walnut and see the river in front of you. This is our standard cross section that we utilize for the street. This is an initial rendering. We tweaked this a little bit, but basically what we have right now is you have a street with 2 7-foot parking lanes and 2 travel ways down the center. Okay, it's a two-way street with parking on both sides. It's a pretty wide street. What our intent would be to create a 9-foot wide bike lane on the northern side of the street. Okay, so this cross section that you're looking at is if you're standing with your back to the river and looking up the street. So you can see we're maintaining the sidewalk on both sides. The location of the curb, for all intents and purposes, is going to remain exactly where it is. Maybe a couple inches in, a couple inches out, straighten it out a bit. But the curb is going to be exactly where it is. I can't move that because I have storm sewer inlets on both sides. And that would really increase the project cost. Try to start moving storm sewer. I also have utilities on both sides. It's just not feasible to really move that curb line. So we're working with what we're working with in the middle of the street. We were able to squeeze in a 9-foot bike lane. We have a center island that's proposed to be 5 feet from curb to curb. So you're going to have a slant curb in there with some grass areas. If you look at the plan, up here in front of you, as we get down the way here, there are some areas where we have some bulb outs where that center island moves from being 5 feet to closer to 8 or 9 feet. Those are some of the areas where we're going to target to put trees. You have overhead electric on both sides of this street. It runs up the northern side for a ways, and then it actually jogs over to the southern side. That really complicates trying to plant trees on the edge. So we're actually looking to put the trees in the middle of the street. That's another reason why we're putting this island in. The biggest, I would say the bike lane might be the biggest change, but really what the biggest change that we'll all feel is that to fit all this in here and maintain parking, that's the biggest thing we've heard from you residents and everyone else in town, is that parking is a big issue on this street because of how many people live there, how many cars are there. So Normally, I would approach this and say, well, we can get 2 lanes of traffic and 1 lane of parking. But we heard you. We are not going to eliminate any parking on the street, okay? The goal is to actually change the street to one way. It will be one way heading towards the river. And then we'll maintain parking on both sides of the street for the residents, okay? So, again, just a little bit on the, and you can see that in the cross section there. The 2 parking lanes and then the dark car in the middle would be the travel. Okay. Connectivity has been a big part of this. 462 bridge project, which I know is slowly moving along, and we had a little hiccup here with the lead date being pushed, but bike and pedestrian lanes on the bridge project are a big priority. We've looked at ways that we can take those bike lanes off of the bridge that connecting Columbia and Wrightsville and incorporate them into the bike network. So if you can consider, picture yourself traveling east on the bridge from Wrightsville, you can get off the bridge, turn right on 2nd Street. Right now, you can just kind of run along the lanes of traffic, but we've also discussed in a future project trying to bring a dedicated bike lane on 2nd Street. Imagine coming out to 2nd Street and you hit Walnut and you have this bike lane that can take you either up into town or down to the river park. Defined, very easy. That's really what we're looking at doing. And there is already going to be facilities in place because we have the crossing of the trail down on Bridge Street where it crosses 441. You'll be able to run up Bridge Street and be able to loop around and turn right and travel west towards Wrightsville. So it'll be a full network where you can come on and off the 462 bridge, ultimately connect into Walnut Street to get you to the downtown, or get you down to Columbia Crossings and on the Northwest River Trail. So connectivity is a huge piece. And I wish I would have pressed forward because that would have made a lot more sense to you. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Is the red routes being on and off the 462 bridge, and then ultimately the blue routes being what we're looking at in the borough. We are looking at utilizing Commerce Street. Again, this isn't anything that's going to happen in this project. We're only focused on Walnut Street as part of this project, but I want you to see the bigger picture long range. Utilizing Commerce Street to try to get bike traffic off of Front Street would be a positive, I think, for a lot of people. That's not a very inviting part of the trail. And again, here's a little bit of the plan that I've already talked through. For anybody who's interested, I know that's tough to see on the board. I do have a printout of 24 by 36. Again, this is in the council packet. If you want to look online, that plan is there. But this is probably the best plan to look at to get an understanding of what's going on. The yellow being the travel ways, that would be the one-way street. The purple being the parking lanes on both sides of that travel way. The kind of the turquoise bluish color being the island, and then the pink being the bike lane. The green areas are the existing sidewalk, and of course we have in the lighter pink is the ADA areas, which is a big part of this project as well, bringing this entire street up to current ADA compliance. The curb and sidewalk out there isn't terrible, but you've got a lot of issues with heaved sidewalks here and there. You got some tripping hazards. Again, I think I've said I give it like a C- right now. It's not the worst street in town, but absolutely can see some improvements for the safety of the walk. Just to walk you through a little bit of how the street will work. We are looking at coming up here from River Park, the pink trail area. You're going to utilize the existing crossing, come across 441, and then get into our bike lane coming up. We have run turning templates on all these streets. One of the things that we want to be aware of is vehicles coming into and out of driveways and streets and make sure that they can make those turns without jumping up over our curbs. So you're going to see some areas where the center island might have been pulled back a little bit to accommodate those turn movements. There's a couple spots where I think you're going to see some concrete washboards. If any of you have seen those going in and out of gas stations, seem to be the most popular place to have them. Something that defines where that center section is, but you can still drive over it for somebody that has a trailer. Okay. They're a different kind of bumpies.
They're a different kind of
It's a different kind of bumpies. That's they're more of a washboard than a dome.
Yeah.
Okay. Big change coming off of 2nd Street here, where you're going to be coming off 2nd Street and being forced to turn right to go towards the river. We know that this eliminates a popular cut through for everyone kind of traveling north on 2nd, where they come and turn left and go to the 462 bridge. That I know could be a detriment to some. However, one of the things that we considered when we looked at what direction that we wanted this street to go is, of course, number one, we want to pull people towards Columbia Crossing. That's most people coming off 462, especially those from out of town, are kind of going towards Columbia Crossings. A safety issue we have is the intersection of 3rd Street and Walnut. There are no signal at that intersection. The sight distance, if you're parked on Walnut, you guys all know, if you're parked on Walnut, either crossing over 3rd or trying to turn left or right, that's a dangerous turn to make in a car, let alone some people that come up with a truck pulling the boat. We do have a crash history there. Chief, you provided me with a lot of those numbers. We put it in the study that we're utilizing. So that's one thing that we're actually happy about, is we're going to make that intersection of 3rd and Walnut a lot safer by not allowing vehicles to come up Walnut and try to turn either way. You're going to have to go down 441, turn, and come on Locust Street. We're not proposing any changes to Locust Street, and that is plenty wide and can handle all of the traffic movements that you desire to take. Okay. Those are some of the turning templates that I referenced of how we set the limits of that center island for both. And this is the drawing that you would have seen on the borough website now for a while now. This is the rendering of what the street would look like. Again, looking to house some trees in the middle, and looking to house the trees in the middle. There. House the trees in the middle, and then looking at installing street lights on the side. We're picking a lamppost style street light that actually matches. We have the same, it's a Hadco light is who the manufacturer is. We have the same lights on 3rd Street that we do down at River Park, and they also wrap around Locust. So whether we made a conscious decision or not, we kind of have an official borough street light already. So our intention with this would be to carry those street lights down. However, we don't want to light this up like it's Walmart. We want the street lights to be a little bit lower, to be pedestrian friendly. You kind of like when you're walking up that street to have some of those kind of bright and dim places. It makes you feel more comfortable than just a stagnant, straight, glaring light. We have to convince PennDOT that that's okay, because most of their manuals kind of require all that. But our intention is to have kind of lower level, lower position lighting that provides safety for the vehicles and the residents in the street. And we're currently working with a sub-consultant to lay those lights out and do the photometric plans and figure that all out. That's an example of the sidewalk zone we've been talking about. So we're going to maintain the existing width of the sidewalk. The lights will go in generally where the trees are right now. And then if you're on the northern side of the street, you'll have a divided bike lane there that you can spill out over. On the southern side, it's going to feel very similar to what it feels like now, just better lit. Okay? And the lights that we're looking at, we want to put ability for banners on them. We want the ability for Christmas lights, really just incorporate that same feel that we have right here on 3rd Street in front of Burning Bridge Antiques. Those are the lights. They're not going to be as tall as those, but those are generally what you can see. And again, this is the the really cool rendering. This is what we're going for. Another piece of the rendering there is I think these are the most powerful slides we have, or what the vision is, intersection of South and Walnut. You can see with the one way. There will be a stop sign proposed on Walnut Street at 2nd. So if you're coming, that would be west, so I would say if you're coming towards the river on Walnut, there will be a new stop sign placed there, and that is to allow for the safety of bikes in the bike lane, but also for vehicles on 2nd Street. Picture yourself in that red car right there. You're pretty far away from where that white car is, and that white car is going to be heading south. So we want the white car to stop and give everybody on 2nd Street an opportunity to see what's going on. So that's one way we're going to improve this intersection and hopefully reduce any conflicts with the bikes. And there's our connection at the bottom. So as I led this presentation off, we want to be able to kind of somebody stand there and look up, see a nice patterned sidewalk with this tree line and say, wow, that looks really neat. I think I might want to go explore Columbia a little bit.
Yes, I was my favorite.
Yeah, this is an idea we had. So we're gonna see if this one's in the budget or not, but yeah, and that's definitely not PennDOT approved. But, so we might do this after the project's built, right, Julie? She's like, oh boy.
You don't hear that.
Yeah. And again, why we're here is any questions or concerns, thoughts from anyone in attendance. I'd be happy to open the floor up to council or anyone here in the audience and answer any questions you have.
How much space is going to be between the cars parked on this side and this side?
The travel lane is 10 feet wide.
So if one car is parked here, you're going to have 10 feet between the two cars?
Correct.
Okay. And you said we're going to lose 2 parking spots?
The plan is actually there'll be some parking spaces lost on the actual street. It is minimal, I think 2 or 3. However, we are looking to increase parking along Commerce Street as part of this too. You have a lot down there on Commerce Street. We've been discussing, not necessarily as part of this project, but the future plans that might actually happen before this thing is built is we want to double the angled spots that we've already built on Commerce. So we want to give some additional parking down on that side of the street.
Okay.
But you're gonna lose a few spots, and this is a good. Let me get back to the.
It's more than 2.
So we need to utilize. Again, remember we have some spacing in here where the existing driveways are. Okay, and there are some spaces where we have some bulb outs that we're gonna end up losing a few.
Yeah, because with those bolt outs right there, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You're going to lose about a dozen parking spots.
I don't think that number is accurate, but I can get you the real number. I have
Probably
off
10.
the top of that.
I think it'd be safe to say 10.
I can tell you that again with the addition of the parking on Commerce, which we were looking to throw about 10 in down there, it was a net positive in parking.
Net positive, but then you got to walk a little bit further if you're not able to get to a parking spot, where you're normally used to parking. Hence, what happens when you got groceries or you're doing this or you're doing that. What do you do there? Do you double park and unload your groceries?
That's the last thing that you're going to do. That's going to block the street.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is this really about the bicyclists, or is this about we, the homeowners that live on Walnut Street?
I would say it's both.
Okay.
I would say it's both, okay? We approach this plan with, again, how do we make this a gateway street? I recognize it's different. And we knew this going into this project, and we were very clear from the beginning. This is different. We don't have any other streets like this in the borough. This is not something typically we see, okay? But what we're striving for is something that's gonna better the borough, better the community, and in turn, I'm not a real estate agent, but I think it's gonna be a pretty stinking cool street to live on when it's done. So I'm not gonna make any promises for increased property values or anything. I really don't wanna get into that, but, again, when I look at some of the renderings that we showed here, you know, that's really what we're striving for. Is we think that's a really awesome looking street that checks a lot of the boxes of what we're trying to do in this borough in increasing mobility for bicyclists and pedestrian, improving safety, and ultimately tying our two assets together. So
I mean, have
that's
you
our goal.
have you had bicyclists like coming to you, asking you like for a better way to the river or whatever have you?
So I'll answer, yeah, we actually have, and with the completion of the Northwest River Trail, there has been a lot of interest in making Columbia more bike friendly.
Right.
So people who are on the trail then would want to come up to the local street and maybe go to Hinkle's, go to the cafes, go shopping or do something and then go back down. So that's one of the comments we got early on is people do want to have a bikeable way to get into town from the trail.
Okay. I mean, you've held a meeting or you asked several bicyclists or what have you, or is this just your opinion?
No, it is my opinion. I think that will help. We also talked to people who bike, and that was their opinion as well.
Because the bicycle trail was a great addition. It does bring people into town. I hear them talk about it all the time.
Right.
So,
And we want to keep going with that theme and make sure that if you do come up into town on your bike, there's places to park your bike.
right.
You don't just come up to Local Street and then walk. We want to develop a network that expands from this area into more into town so people can bike more places. Not through this project, but ongoing planning.
And you want to plant trees and everything. Who's going to be responsible for trimming all those trees, cutting the grass, or whatever have you?
That's James.
He's the highway project manager.
Yep.
Who's going to be
Think
responsible
Public
for all
Works.
that?
Public Works.
Public Works, okay.
With help from the Shade Tree Commission,
Right.
Oh,
because they do a lot for us,
okay.
And the park rangers.
and the park rangers.
And you don't foresee any future problems with those trees being planted there like that? As far as the roots and all that other stuff and everything else? Like with sewer lines and stuff like that?
Right, fewer problems than what we see where they are right now. So
Okay.
that's why we're moving them towards the center, is if you walk up that street right now, there are quite a few trees that have been removed.
That's all over town.
Yeah, it is. So I'm just thinking specifically here, I know of some trees that have recently been removed. I know of some trees that are still there that have the sidewalk heaped up about 5 inches behind them.
Yeah.
You've got trees that have grown up and basically intertwined themselves around power lines. You've got low
Exactly.
power lines.
Right.
So the center of the street is open.
Okay.
Now, again, we're gonna have to work with the shade tree. We're not planting any Bradford pears out there. We're gonna work with the shade tree to pick trees that are gonna thrive in this area, that have the right root system, that aren't gonna hopefully impact the road, impact the curb. Again, a 5 foot wide by however long grass strip is about the best environment that I can think of in a downtown to be able to plant trees, as opposed to keep continuing to do the little tree wells.
Right.
Again, the overhead was the big thing though, is honestly, our initial idea when we started laying this out was how cool would it be to run lights up the center and have like a railroad light, and then we're like, you know what, we don't have anywhere for trees, because they're not in a good spot now. So that's why we really wanted to kind of move that, let that tree canopy grow out over the street and give the street some shade, and then you have you have a focal point in the center with that tree canopy, and then on the sides, your street's going to be carried by your building facades and your street lights and your new sidewalk. So.
Derek, you touched on something that I think is important. Our Shade Tree Commission is doing a great job identifying species of trees that are most appropriate for the applications around town. So instead of just planting all of the same species the whole way up Locust Street, that all die at the same time, or, every one of them tears up, tears up the sidewalk. The Shade Tree Commission is doing a really good job suggesting what species and how to vary the species along the streets and everything to prevent the problems that we've seen in the past from all of the same thing being, or you end up having, the ash borer beetle come through and take out a whole street full of trees all at once. We're trying to prevent that kind of stuff too. So they've been doing a great job providing guidance as to what species works best in what application, so we can avoid those problems that we've seen.
So how's the street sweeper gonna work then also? How will that come into play? I mean,
So the width of the street sweeper is gonna be able to run just like it always did. I mean, I assume we'll look at no parking during certain days, as you have now, one side of the street at a time. There would be no problem with it running down the center, and frankly, it's narrow enough to run it down the bike lane. The bike lane will have, we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet to determine if there will be barricades in front of the bike lane or how, like removable bollards. We haven't gotten to that point yet. So that's maybe one of the pieces we still need to figure out, whether this is just going to be signage, or we obviously need to prevent cars from mistakenly turning and running down the bike lane. So we need to look at that, but theoretically we'll be able to run any piece of equipment that the borough has, whether that be a plow or a street sweeper down that bike lane.
right, and that's just gonna be for strictly bicycles.
You can walk on it.
You can walk on
You
it?
can walk. I mean, the thought would be you could use the sidewalk to walk because it's pretty
Right.
wide. But if
Okay.
people want to walk out into the bike lane, you might get your bell. They might ring the bell at you. Nobody's going to cite you for it. Again, a thing we thought of is strollers. People with strollers. I know that I brought my family over here, and when they were my girls are a little older now. Back when we were first scoping this project, I brought my bike over and threw my two girls in my bike trailer. And I can tell you, I wanted nothing to do with riding them in downtown up Walnut Street. Not only because I wasn't a big fan of driving uphill, but that's a physical thing. But honestly, it was the traffic. I did not feel safe riding. There's no room on the sidewalk right now, and you shouldn't be riding your bike on the sidewalk anyway. But I did not feel safe riding a bicycle up that street, let alone down the street when you can't really see people coming at you. So that's really what it's about.
One thing that's gonna do is it's gonna eliminate a lot of speeding down that street.
I hope so.
Which I made several phone calls about, and the police are like, well, there's really no way to monitor, set up and monitor speed on that street.
Mhm.
So that'll be one positive thing anyway.
Yep.
So,
Derek, with the trees growing out over, like you said, out when he brought up the street sweeper, what about the height of the trees with the street sweeper?
It won't be any different than what you see now. There'll be no, I mean, a tree right now is usually the trunk is planted, maybe a foot and a half off of the back of the curb. You figure right now the center of the trunk's gonna be, 2.5 feet from the base of the curb in that 5 foot. So it's going to be a similar situation, similar spacing to what you would see a current street tree, and you're just going to have to keep up with pruning to keep the overhang.
And the one other thing I had a question on was, I think I asked you this before in an email about the double parking there at the armory.
Yeah.
What are they gonna do about that? What will happen there?
So I think what I said back then, and first of all, I think it's enforcement. Don't do it. So prefer if people don't double park on the street, find a spot. But actually what I looked at with the No Wanger Center is in this configuration, it actually creates a place for them to double park. There's going to be an opening in front of the building. There'll be a cut in the bike lane to allow access to the driveway in front. So you're actually going to have the bike lane 7 feet, the bike lane is 5 feet. The median island is 5 feet. The parking lane is 7 feet. Okay, so that creates a 13-foot separation from the edge of the travel lane to the edge of the bike lane. So they'll actually put some places in there where somebody could pull in and throw a car in there diagonally and not impede bike or travel. Don't do it, please don't do it. We're not encouraging you to do it, but yes.
Yeah.
There's
And I
room
think,
there.
if we are, when we are having the conversation about how we are protecting the bike lane, whether it's barricades or removal of bollards or something, it will be important to also include them at the no Langer
Yeah, I
thing.
mean, at every cut, basically, you want some sort of deterrent.
Is the alley down there gonna still have access to go up to the park?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, there'll be a cut. Everywhere where there's I can walk you up the plan here. That helps. We still have, there you go. So down at the bottom there, this is starting the creek, you have your first access point into Eastern Drillers? Eastern Drillers. So Eastern Drillers maintains their driveway on from Walnut Street, and then there's also the alleyway that gets you into to the rear side of Eastern Drillers. Those are two cuts, and I'm on the north side here. Then you have Commerce Street, which is going to maintain a cut. Moving up the street, you have a cut. You can see the pink one there. That's, oh, geez, a little too far.
Yeah.
Click them on, click. Yeah. So there's Second Street where Mark's mouse is, and just to the left, if you see the magenta there, that's the park access. So that maintains a cut in the piece, and then up the next cut is the Noah Wenger Center. Okay, and then on the southern side of the street, we have a couple of cuts for existing driveways, but that's it.
And
For the park driveway, can you go straight across Second Street into the park driveway, or do you have to?
Yes,
On Second Street?
yeah, you can.
I'm asking for my neighbor, they park in their driveway at the park.
There won't be anything restricted as long as you don't try to turn right at all. You gotta go straight.
Okay.
Yep.
I have 3 questions for you. Who was the gentleman that was speaking in the audience? What's his name?
Paul?
Paul. Paul, good questions, good comments, good feedback. You answered like half of my questions with your questions. Really good stuff. I assume that since this is a complete street project, all the underground utilities, the gas, and the sewer will be taken care of at that time as well?
Yeah, as far as I know, we're in good shape out there. The facilities have been upgraded. I know the water line was replaced not too long ago, and there was a gas project out there within the last 10 years. Sanitary is okay. So we're not anticipating any utility work, but we're absolutely gonna check into that.
So they're not looking into putting gas meters in front of our houses down there on that block? Or on the 100 block?
I take it up there, you guys plan on that?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The one thing that we did look at that we're not gonna be able to do as part of this project is vary all the overhead lines. Now, we'd love to have been able to clear that whole street out and get rid of all the lines and bury them like you have on the 200 block of Locust Street. The timing of that is difficult. It takes a long time to get all that coordinated, and the cost of that exceeds the cost of the project. So, not now. We'd like to maybe do it sometime, but not this project.
So with all this being said, does that part still remain part of the historic district then?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, speaking of that, if that, the 100 and 200 blocks are in the historic district of Walnut. So then I thought UGI wasn't allowed to put the meters there in the historic district.
No, it's not when they can't run gas to houses, it's where they have to locate the meters. So they can still have gas there.
But I mean, it wasn't his question, are they putting them out front?
Oh, I thought you said, oh, you put meters in, right?
No, I was like, in around town, they came around and put some of those meters in front of the houses instead of them in your basement or whatever have you.
I thought we participated in that legal
Yeah,
action.
we did. I misunderstood. I thought you said, are you still gonna be able to run gas?
Oh,
Yes.
no.
Are they gonna put the meters in front? We hope not.
Okay.
And at this point, it's not, I mean, if UGI comes in before us, they may. At this point, they have not notified us that it's their intention to get into the street and do any gas work. But we will absolutely make sure that if they have any intentions, that they do that before we invest this into the street.
Yeah, otherwise they'll be doing the street.
But wouldn't we be able to stop them from putting meters in front of the houses? Because we were involved in that legal
Well,
action.
I'm not talking about the meters, I'm just talking about like an actual project. I don't want to do this project and then 2 years later have to come back and say we have to replace the gas main.
Oh, okay.
That's what that was my concern.
I think I know where you're going. My understanding of that legal action through the PUC was that municipalities do have the right to protect the integrity of their historic districts. And if there are feasible ways to put them somewhere other than right in front of the house or right in the sidewalk, then they have to do that. So we can work with them. I think it's just with some conditions. But generally speaking, the PUC did rule that we have some ability, we local municipalities, have some ability to regulate where those utilities go.
Because that really, some of those created tripping hazards and they looked ugly.
Oh.
They were just a mess.
And the big argument was it actually took away what we call the ADA pathway, the required 3 or 4 foot path, so that somebody with a disability or wheelchair could not get through because you have a utility pole and you have the gas meter and there's 2.5 feet.
Thank you.
I'll add on real quick on the underground utilities is we did a couple of years ago have USG come out and camera the storm sewer lines out there. And those are concrete lines and they're all in really good shape. So we'll be replacing some inlet tops, like all the inlet boxes are going to stay, but we're going to put new tops on new grids and pretty that up. So it'll look brand new from the top, but we're not doing anything. It looks good.
My second question was, at one point we were talking about an economy of scale program for folks who have access from an alleyway to pave a portion of their backyard to have off-street parking. Is this a location where that project would be feasible, where that might work, or is it blocked in by other houses and structures?
I think it is a good one, because I think the alleyway behind there is a good example of one where if people wanted to, we could add some additional parking back there. I know the Noah Wang Center does have a small parking lot in the back of it, back there off the alley.
I would like to consider that when the project moves forward, include that in the conversation.
Did you ever think about like permit parking? Like buying a permit and you get 1 spot in front of your house or 2 spots in front of your house, kind of like Lancaster does?
So I'll throw that at council. I know we've talked about it. It has mixed reviews. Some people like it, some people don't.
We have considered it. There was a traffic or a parking study done several years ago. And the way permit parking works is not you get a permit to park in front of your house. It's, okay, we have this section and it's usually a whole block or something like that, or 2 blocks. And you have a permit, and each house gets X number of permits for free. And you can park anywhere in that block,
Like
or
100 block, 200 block, 300 block.
right, but it would be the whole block around, not just your street.
Okay.
And normally, what was told us in the parking study was when you do that, you can actually create parking issues in the surrounding areas because people that would normally park on that street that are not getting a permit are then going out and blocking the next one. So then you end up in a situation where every block where you're permitting every street, and so you end up, okay, you can't get a permit for your block, you gotta end up parking your second car 5 blocks away because all the other blocks around you are permitted. So it can create, and we have the parking study that is actually in the comp plan to show which streets have parking that are close to capacity parking, and all of the ones around them are also close to capacity. So like I said, you would end up in a situation where we permit this block, but then we'd also have to permit 3 and 4 blocks on either side, just so that we're not creating more problems. You'd end up parking 6 blocks from your house.
I got you. I got you. I understand.
And we also asked the question about painting lines to mark the spaces, like is up here on Locust Street, and like you see in some other municipalities. And we actually had Derek do some studies for us on that. We took some of our busiest, our most congested parking blocks to see if we would gain spaces by having them lined. When you line the spaces, there are requirements as to how big the parking spot has to be. We would actually lose space, number of spaces on our busiest blocks if we lined them. Because you would only gain spaces if you have people that are parking appropriately.
Right.
Meaning they're leaving too much space between, or, you know, like they're, so, but if you have people that are parking appropriately with just the amount of needed space to back up in front and back, that's actually smaller than what the requirement would be if we were to line it.
So there aren't gonna be any lines then on this Walnut Street project?
No.
And about parking inappropriately, you know, come winter time when it snows and we don't have off-street parking, a lot of people will park inappropriately, so we have a place to throw the snow.
But you know what? You know what you're gonna have? You're gonna have a 9-foot bike lane that is not going to be used where you can put all your snow.
Put it in the median. Put it in
And
the median.
you'll have a 5-foot island.
Don't put it in the, yeah, put it in the
So
island. Don't
there
put it in
is
the bike
no
lane.
reason you should have aisles in your parking lane. See, there you go. Because no one's riding a bike when you have, you know, snow.
You're not gonna say anything about that then?
So, but yeah, I mean, so that's a positive there.
Yeah.
I was just curious, once we get bikers up on the 3rd Street, what happens to them? Do we consider bike lanes on 3rd leading into the downtown? What does that look like?
That's the next study, that's what I was talking about. Once we get them up there, we need, the next study is gonna be looking at getting bikes and everything else around town, downtown.
That's our next thing. Mary?
Just a comment on this whole project. Going back to the River Park master plan, if you look at that master plan, one of the objectives of that master plan was a Walnut Street gateway to the downtown. And thank you for doing this, because it takes it off the River Park Committee to try and figure this out. But this is a great project for Walnut Street. Walking it every day, this is a great project. I can't wait to see it done. Thank you.
Brad?
I read that you contracted Walker Consulting Company in 2020 to do the parking study, and they had estimated that you had some 6,543 spaces that were available in this area, and that only 53% of these spaces were actually in use. That was what the finding said. Councilperson Kaufman was quoted saying that you had a parking perception problem, not an actual parking problem.
Right, because that's what Walker told us when he reviewed their findings with us.
So I do personally believe that most people do park inappropriately, and that lines would help, but that's neither here nor there. But what I would be interested to know would be if this plan would change the findings of that study, in your opinion.
No, because it's not significantly changing the number of available spaces on that block. And also, that study was a huge area. One block is not going to make a significant difference on their findings.
Okay, but you do estimate that there will be spaces that would be lost. Is that correct?
Space is lost on the street, but space is gained because we're adding parking down on Commerce Street.
Right. Okay.
As part of this project?
As part of a different project, which may get done before this one's even done.
We're gonna do that. That project will be done in-house. I mean, Jake built that parking lot that's down there already on Commerce, so we're just gonna pick it up and duplicate it. So that could happen
that could probably be next year's.
We're talking budget, yeah, we're getting, coming up on budget.
Yeah, we're coming up on budget season, so.
What's the timeline for this project?
So,
From start to finish, when is it supposed to start?
where we're at right now, we're kind of at PennDOT's mercy to be able to get through our entire approval process. Julie, I'm kind of looking at you, you've been through a lot more of these. We would love to try to bid this and start construction next year. It's gonna be a heavy lift, but that's what we're shooting for.
Yeah,
Sorry,
realistically, with we're still in preliminary design. We have to get our environmental clearance, which this is part of, and then we move into final design. Also, PennDOT is struggling with funding projects right now, and they've just kind of rearranged some of my projects in my portfolio. So I'm guessing construction is going to be more likely in 2025, realistically. And I think we can do it in one construction season, so.
Will there be other public meetings besides this one? Besides the ones you had on the Clement Crossings?
This was kind of the end of the road as far as what's required. Again, the one at River Park and a couple that we've done here was as part of the schematic phase. We're reaching the end of our preliminary plan. So after tonight, the goal is to lock this thing in, and as Julie said, get our approvals from PennDOT and go to final design. Once we go to final design, our intention is we're not changing much from what you see tonight. We really can't. So if there are any, earth-shattering comments, we want to try to flush those out now.
Yeah. With every project like this, there are winners and
I'm sorry, I didn't do it before, and I sort of got beside myself. I want to make sure we state our names so that we can get that into the record. I'm sorry, Teresa. The first gentleman, can you give your name to Teresa?
Oh, it's Paul.
Yeah, Paul. And then,
We have the guy next to him.
Portrait.
all right, and I think we got everyone else, all right?
My name is Adam Mullen with Mullen Books down on the 100 block. And with every project like this, there are winners and there are losers. My building and Eastern Drillers are zoned commercial. I believe we're the only commercial zone parcels on Walnut Street in the 100 and 200 block. That's from an observation. I could be wrong. And as a commercial property, I have trucks that come in. Eastern Drillers have trucks that come in. They have, and a coffee shop down there has trucks that come in and deliver things. Some of these trucks are small box trucks, and some of these trucks are trailers on the back of the tractor. They're pretty long. These trucks come down Commerce Street and they make a right-hand turn on the Walnut and head towards the river. Or sometimes they get lost and they used to come up Walnut Street, and they won't be doing that anymore with the one-way street. But this particular layout and schematic takes away some of that ability as a commercial property to have trucks come in and do that. It also moves our loading zone, my loading zone, 14 feet away from the curb where I currently have it. And I have a cutout as well to go through technically there's an alley that goes through my building, which is closed off right now, but it still retains a curb cut. Therefore, one could say that it still exists on paper, the right to turn up and go through my building if I so chose to open that back up. So when I look at the parking schematic here, to have a large truck come down Commerce Street and make a right-hand turn into the new, going past this bike lane, into the very narrow, especially for a turning trailer truck. If you have parking on the on that side of the cut, that truck will not be able to make that turn. I would say you can probably fit 5 to 7 cars in front of my building right now on that block between Commerce Street and the alley going up next to my building. So when you extend that and then make a radius, you're going to lose to maintain that radius. And Eastern Drillers, they have dumpster trucks that back into that alley to take their rather large dumpster away. And that truck needs a turning radius, which is now being severely crimped in by a 9-foot bike lane and a 5-foot wide piece of grass populated by trees with cars on the other side. And I guess I'd like to know what accommodations will be made for my commercial property and for Eastern Drillers in this project, in this plan. And I get very concerned when I hear that this will be the last public meeting, and then you'll go into final design, and there won't be any more public meetings to look at the final design and see how, for me, how my needs and my rights have been accommodated by that plan as a commercially zoned piece of property there, and Eastern Drillers as well. And how this is, as a commercial property, I can see that this would certainly benefit me. And I can also see that as a commercial property with unknown future uses, this could also severely limit the use of that property. And selfishly, those are my primary concerns.
So let me answer your first question quickly. The zoning all along this part of Walnut Street down to the alleyway is all downtown commercial, which allows for mixed use. So you're the only commercial use. The entire street, except for Eastern Drillers down to Front Street, is zoned differently, but your entire area is zoned downtown commercial. So other businesses around, other buildings around you could become commercial buildings as well. So zoning wise,
then how has that been accommodated for?
Well, we would make a business based on the parking that's there.
Sure.
That's not what's gonna happen. We're talking about the reality of what's there today. Because if somebody were to come in and do commercial zoning changes for the building that's now a home-owned, building, they would look at the demographics of the area and parking and say, well, this is what we're limited to here now. We're already an existing business, that operates in that facility, and what is going to take place will have an impact on us, like was stated on both sides. But we certainly don't want to just look at the good side of what we'll benefit from, as a business owner. At one point you sell your business, and that may have an impact on future prospective buyers of our property because of the parking circumstances.
Or its ability to function day to day as a commercial enterprise with comings and goings of materials or people.
So I'd like to know, and I'm happy to meet with you outside of this meeting as well, I'd like to know a little bit more about your loading and unloading needs. I can put some of your concerns at rest with this is one of the exhibits that doesn't show your exact, I think this is the other side of the street we're looking at here, but we have run trucking turning templates on every one of the driveways and curb cuts that you see on here to accommodate trucks. We have met with Eastern Drillers. knock on their door. Honestly, what I would have loved to have been able to close their driveway behind Coffee and Cream, because I really wanted to put a solid median in there and basically force them to use the alley that's next to you, because that would be safer for everybody coming off River Park. Talk to them, hey, we use this a lot. I said, okay. And we cut that median back. If you look at the plan, that initial kind of triangle down here, I'll point that if you're, that little piece isn't actually a grass raised island, that's just a flat piece of concrete. So that'll allow all kinds of turning movements in and out of that driveway. So I can tell you, we specifically looked at Commerce Street. We specifically looked at the alley next to your business, and we also looked at the driveway going in and out of Eastern Drillers. And it is not our intention to impede any of the traffic that exists now. Again, I don't want to sit here and say, don't worry, you got nothing. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what your concerns are so that we can make sure that they are specifically addressed in here. So if, Mark, if you can make sure you leave your information here, we can set up a meeting and discuss some of your concerns so I can make sure and get the ball going.
Great.
Okay.
And adding this up, 9 feet and 5 feet is 14 feet. How wide what's the current width of Walnut from curb to curb?
I think it's 40.
And are the manholes, more importantly, centered in Walnut Street? And how do they factor into this? Are they going to be inside the island? Or are they going to be outside the island? Or are they going to be somewhere in between the curb on the island?
They'll be outside the island. The only utility that's impacted by the island is the water line. That's where the water line is. But it is, yeah, it's fun out there because, again, there's storm sewer on both sides of the street. So you have, normally, most streets only have one main storm sewer with tie-ins across. This street actually has storm sewer running parallel underneath, in front of each curb. And then you have sanitary, you have water, and you have gas. And you have an abandoned water line on the other side of the street too. So there's a lot in there. But currently where that island is where the water line is. So we'd be over the water line, not over the sanitary sewer.
Mm-hmm. And how would tree roots impact that water?
That goes back to our discussion of picking the right trees that aren't going to impact that water line. We've got to work with Columbia Water, make sure they're on board with anything we do in the plant. Most utilities actually like it when they're located underneath the grass areas. It's easier to dig up and get to. So I think they'll be happy about where the island's located as opposed to having to dig the street if they have main break. But yeah, the tree selection is very important.
To answer your question, curb to curb is 38.
38, thanks. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, I looked through on that slide.
I got a lot of numbers running around in my head.
It's 38 feet from curb to curb.
Hey, do we have access to the copy from PennDOT, like their requirements and stuff? Can we look at that anywhere? Like what PennDOT is requiring?
For design or just process?
Just process.
Julie, is there a manual I can give him?
It's a manual.
Yeah, it's a manual, it is.
It's actually several manuals. But if there's something specific, so for example, maybe what you're asking is they classify all the roads from like local streets, rural, urban, freeway, highway, and there's certain design criteria. What you've talked about, lane width, shoulder width, sidewalk width, and so there are certain requirements based on the kind of street it is and based on the speed. So
The speed?
Speed.
Yeah, what the
Posted speed.
Okay, what is the posted speed going to be?
Standard is 25.
25.
Okay.
So I don't know if that was what you were asking, like how wide does the lane have to be? They're broken down into different categories.
How about in this particular instance, how wide does the lane have to be?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I know specifically where to look at that. In fact, that's part of one of the submissions that we're just about wrapping up. It's called a safety submission. So the designers, look in PennDOT's design manual and gather all this information so they know all the criteria that they have to meet for this type of project, this type of roadway, this type of setting. And they have to meet all that. And if you don't, then you have to go through a process to get a design exception, which I don't think that we have any on this project.
I think 10 feet's gonna match. They prefer 11. But
Are the
Yeah, I-
sidewalks uniform in width on both sides, or is one side larger than the other?
no, there's a little bit of variation. The curb lines are consistent with the carway. There's some slight variation in the sidewalk due to kind of porches and steps, and I can tell you that when we laid this out, the right-of-way of the street is 66 feet wide. That's the public right-of-way. And when you lay that 66 feet in there, that just about matches with the front face of most of the buildings. But then again, you have some porches and you have some steps and whatnot. So if you're measuring the total width of the sidewalk, yes, from the front face of the building to the curb is the same on both sides. But there are obstructions that occur with certain architectural elements of the house. But if you strip away if you cut off all the front porches, it's generally the same.
You might be hindering, it's not gonna hinder, like say someone wants to do construction to the front of their house. Like I just put some new windows in a few years ago and I rented a lift. And I actually was able to park the lift on the sidewalk.
The sidewalk's not changing.
Okay.
That's the best way I can say it. The curb is staying exactly where it is. The sidewalk's being replaced generally in kind. Again, we're making some slight elevation adjustments to make the ADA pathway and just make it all smoother, but
Yeah.
again, I'm not moving the
Both
curb.
sides of the street?
Yeah.
No cost to us then? Okay.
Not-
Other than our tax dollars. that we're paying.
Yeah,
But
and
anyway.
this is grant funded. We're
Okay.
looking at, again, once, this was a grant we applied for in 2019. As the costs are a little different now than they were in 19, they probably will be in 25. So I suspect we're gonna have a small shortfall here that we'll have to look for additional funding for, but I do have some ideas.
Are they gonna do it block by block?
It'll be, as far as construction methods,
Yeah.
in most cases, they'll do one side at a time.
Okay.
It's really up to the contractor what the means and methods are for that.
Okay.
I've seen them do it all different ways.
All right.
I have a question. My name is Heather. Where will we park during the construction?
We'll look at finding places for people to park. For example, we're paving South 2nd Street this year. So we've actually arranged to have people park on Norfolk Sutherland so that when we're in there tearing up the street, there is a space for them to go. One option we had is put signs up along Commerce and say, you know, for residents along Walnut Street only. It's not right by your house, but it'll give you a place to park in the same blocks-ish, so that at least you have some place to go and get off the street during construction. It's messy, I get
Commerce
it.
is gonna be a busy place.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's messy during construction, I get that. It's, anytime we pave a street, we move people out of where they normally park.
Normally, they only have to move out during the day when the work is happening.
Right, and then they can pull back in.
And then you can pull back in the evening, so unless you're working from home.
That's okay.
Yeah, well, Mary
No,
was,
I'm okay. You
oh,
covered
you're
it.
okay?
Yeah, when any construction project, you're dislocated. And this is no different than any other street reconstruction.
So I'm not sure if I answered your questions about the process, but if I'll give you my card and you can email me if you want, if you need more information about the design criteria or the PennDOT process, I'll be happy to share that with you because I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, getting there. In the back.
Gina, my name is Gina. I live on Walnut Street, but I'm looking at 700 blocks, so this doesn't really affect me. But when you talk about the safety of the bicyclists, bringing them up onto Walnut, has there been any studies or anything to change Front Street itself with the bike path and the bicyclists? Because that just seems like a dangerous area.
Yeah.
And you're trying to pull them up on the Walnut now.
They're safer on Walnut.
They're safer on Walnut.
They're
than they
safer
are
on Walnut and
Front.
to Commerce, and then they can go under the bridge and right down, like across.
So if you look at this slide, what we have talked to the county about is instead of coming out of the park, going in front of Coffee and Cream, and Drills, and going down that stretch with anyone who has biked that part of the trail, they know that's the worst section.
Horrible.
So we've actually talked to the county about bringing the bike lane straight up, going down Commerce. I know Commerce is going to be a very busy place. Down Commerce, and then either turn down Commerce again or go under the bridge and go straight across to Bridge Street and come down that way. So getting that initial segment off of Front Street. So yeah, that's something we talked about early on in the project.
That's a messy area.
Yeah, it seems like the worst place for bikes to cross is where the blue line ends there, where they try to get from that curvy part over to the bike trail.
Right.
Absolutely, we totally agree. From day one of that project, that has been a frustration. There was no other place to put the bike lane. You don't have enough width to squeeze it in between Front Street and the railroad tracks.
Right.
So we had to go around to get it in.
Yeah, because there's actually there's, rules about how close to the railroad tracks you can be. Like there is a certain easement that you cannot impinge upon.
But it's just, we made that the truck route.
Yep.
And now we also have bicyclists, along with the tractor trailers.
Yep.
And it's just a bad area.
Norfolk Southern's the issue.
I know, but I just think since we're trying to pull everyone up on Walnut, how does this affect Front?
Frank.
I kind of kept quiet because I wanted the people that live down there to give their views. How was the people notified of this meeting?
Both meetings, the one down at Columbia Crossing and the one tonight, we advertised on Facebook, we advertised on Text My Gov, and we put physical paper flyers on each door.
Yep.
Okay. And my understanding is, that's what I heard here too, the governor has stopped all projects. And he wants to look at everything. So is the bulk of the funding coming from the state for this?
The bulk of the bulk of the money has been, I'm going to say this regularly, it's through the county, but it's state funds. So this is not being currently held up by the budget issue, because these funds have already been allocated.
Actually, the money for construction is federal dollars.
Oh, so there you go.
It's federal dollars. Which is the grant.
And grant's probably not the right word either. It's through transportation funding. And it's through the county MPO. They allocated funds for this.
If it's federal dollars,
We still have to follow state rules.
could our match be state funds? If we try to get this on the tip.
I don't think it can.
I don't know, I'm just
Yeah, I don't
asking.
believe so.
Nice
There's a
thought.
local match requirement.
Yeah.
For the federal
But
money.
yeah, I mean, if we make our match, but if we have overruns,
Do you have a number what this might cost?
You do.
in fact, I think we've already spent our match, our local match, because our match was the engineering part.
Yes.
Yeah, your match
Right.
has been, I think, spent. At
Yeah.
this point, it's gonna be finding enough money to pay for construction.
Right.
I think our funding is 875.
That sounds right.
Ish. I think we have 875 right now,
I think you're right, Eric, 865.
865, so we're around there. Estimates right now is about 1.3
Total.
dollars, current. So,
$1,300,000.
1.3 million.
But in 2025, it could be a lot more.
Could be more, could be less. We could
Well,
look
it's just the
at-
last.
We could look at some scope decrease, we could look at material changes, this is basically for what we have rendered here is what we're trying to build. We're still ironing out our lighting design, that's gonna be a big piece. And a little, the lighting alone is probably gonna be $300,000 to $400,000.
And you're gonna turn those out during the Mayfly Hatch?
I guess we'll have to talk about that.
If you're gonna put big lights up there. Yeah.
Amber poles.
You can have a Walnut Street bank
Yeah.
lot.
There you
This is what they should have done.
Can we get
That's
the
another thing you
LED
gotta
that we
look
can
at.
change to amber
Yeah.
and the white?
Make them red and green.
All right, now 1.4, Heather.
No, we're not doing that. What about the under bridge lights?
There you go.
Yeah.
Here's a good opportunity to go down to the borough sheds, where the borough overspent for the light stand.
The lights down there are too high, they're too tall.
You know, can we use any of them?
No, they're too tall.
They're too tall.
That's a shame. That's a shame.
We're gonna use them, Frank. We'll get them in the ground.
They might not be usable by the time you want to use them.
They'll be antique by.
They'll be antiques, yeah, we'll sell them for money then.
Yeah. Question on the sidewalk. You're going to put the inlaid brick both sides.
It's on the rendering. It's something that we haven't determined yet. That's a piece that's going to come as part of final design. Is what are we looking at? Is it going to be inlaid brick? That's probably the most expensive route. Is it going to be a stamped concrete? Is it going to just be regular concrete with the trowel lines in it? We have to figure that out yet.
Okay, you had said some of the sidewalk is good. Are you going to replace all the sidewalk and make it uniform?
All the sidewalk is going to be replaced with the exception of some areas between like residential steps, okay? We're basically going all the way back. If you stand on the street and look up, I was talking about the build line, like to the front facades. If you let your eye move towards the middle where everyone's front porches and steps jut out, there'll be a straight line and all of that will be replaced. There are sections of sidewalk that currently exist that we're going to save that are between basically the front of the steps and the rear and the front facade of the property. Number one, because they're actually in really good condition. Some of that sidewalk's in really good shape and we don't need to. Number two, because of the issue that we're under with PennDOT and the process, the 66-foot right-of-way, I said it's generally where the facades are. Some areas of the street, if you measure from facade to facade, it's like 66 feet and a half. And under this process, if we are outside of our public right-of-way by even an inch, we have to go through the state procedure to acquire right-of-ways, which the estimate to do that is about $15,000 per right-of-way. And we're not doing it for an inch.
They ain't gonna know if you don't tell them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the unfortunate part is through this and through the scrutiny that the plans are getting. I know on a normal street project, you guys aren't out there with your rulers measuring the right of way. And generally, we can make the street uniform. We can't do that on this one.
So with all this being said, what are we gonna do with some of the homes down there to help improve the appearance?
What are the homeowners and property owners gonna do once we improve the
I
street to
mean,
improve their house?
Well, what do you, I mean, you can make the street look pretty, everything else, but you still have some homes down there, some rental properties that don't look all too great.
True, but we don't, and I don't wanna get into the business of telling people how to maintain their house and what to do.
We do have people that work for the borough that are supposed to be monitoring these places and supposed to be on these people, like, hey, you know, your window's busted up there, and it's been that way for like the last 15 years. You got chipping and peeling paint on your woodwork, and it's been that way for the last 15 years.
And our code enforcement team does go out, and we do go around town, and we do help people by encouraging them to say, hey, you need to get this fixed up, you need to look at your house. If it meets the minimum standards, we can't go in there and say, hey, you know what, I wish you would put a different type of flower in your flower box. Not going there. I know that's what you're saying, but we do go around town, and through code enforcement, we do tell people, hey, this is outside of the minimum standards you're allowed to do, you need to fix that or you get cited.
But you can't tell somebody that, that's living in a building that they have to replace a broken window, can you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially if you live in the historic district, right?
Right.
Well, at some point, the broken window becomes historic.
Derek,
Yes, ma'am.
Will all the existing then street trees come down?
Yes.
Who's gonna hear it?
If I could just interject, if we're talking about replacing sidewalks, is this also a time for homeowners to replace connections into the public utilities?
If
Should they so desire?
If they need to, yes. If you need to replace your sewer lateral or water service, great time to do it.
And
And
then,
anybody who's interested in getting gas service.
I would love gas service to my lot up on Commerce Street, because it stops just short of my lot at the line.
Yeah,
And water.
the gas service is one of the things that kills us the most is if anybody's requesting gas and you don't have it, now would be an awesome time to cut up the street, bust up the sidewalk, and run a new gas line, and because afterwards, it's gonna be a challenge.
Right.
But yes, so that's another great point. And again, Todd brought up the utilities before. Now's the time. Us walking the street, I've seen quite a few new gas services that have gone in over the last couple of years, and frankly, we've also seen some property improvements. So it seems like it's getting a little better down there, and I hope this project, just like when we target some of our CDBG projects, we hope that this project is a catalyst to, and basically motivate some people to clean up their properties a little bit more than they are, and a little bit more of an incentive.
And with with going back to the street trees, with the trees being in the median, more of the homes on both sides of the street will benefit from having trees out there instead of just the one, because street trees, I mean, they lower the temperature of the street and the sidewalk, and they help buffer the, harsh sun coming in windows, and so more of the street will benefit from those trees than what's there now.
I disagree with that, because that street goes east to west, and the trees will be in the middle of it. So it's gonna be casting shadows up and down the street, not to the sides. Typically.
But depending on the canopy, it's still gonna provide shade over more of the street than what is currently provided.
I'm glad to see that, rather than in front of the house and the leaves going over on the side of the house and all. I'm glad that, how wide is that aisle?
5 feet at its narrowest, but where the bulb outs are, you'll gain an extra 7 feet because of the parking lot. So as wide as 12. Again, that's where we're gonna look to. We haven't ironed out all of the species and the locations of the trees. That's also gonna be a component of our lighting plans, because we need to figure out where we're gonna put the lights and then where the trees are gonna be, so they don't mess up how the light casts around. All stuff we have to work through in final design. Yep.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns on the Walnut Street project? No? This was very good.
Thank you. Honestly, I want to thank you all for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Right.
Again, Mr. Mullen, I look forward to meeting with you at some point to discuss your loading and truck concerns. But again, just thanks everybody. This was really helpful.
What's the best way I get a hold of you? Can we just stop down sometime, or?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll set up time and we can talk.
Julie knows how to get a hold of you, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I do.
And you gave me your card?
Yes,
So-
yes.
Fine.
All right. Moving on, 8B, the review of Columbia 2040, the implementable comprehensive plan. So who's driving this?
That would be me.
You? All right.
My name is Jessica Fieldhouse. I'm a planner. I work with Derek at CS Davidson. Is there a clicker and
Pass it to Dawn.
Thank you.
Can we put this up?
I'm getting there. Okay.
Not that one.
You can sit down. There.
That's the one.
All right, so the purpose of this presentation this evening is to, in broad terms, walk Borough Council and those of you in the public through the process to create the comprehensive plan, what the comprehensive plan is, and what we proposed within the comprehensive plan. Now, as an aside, I can tell you, though long, this is a perfect meeting to follow what we just talked about, because the comprehensive plan is a policy document that sets priorities like creating a more walkable Columbia Borough, that sets policies like adopting complete streets legislation. So all of the things that Borough Council and the Borough Engineer and what are appointed and boards are working on, the basis for that comes from the borough's comprehensive plan. So it's a policy document. In general, what the comprehensive plan does is creates a baseline of knowledge. So this comprehensive plan will be adopted hopefully in September of 2023. The baseline of knowledge contained in this plan will then provide us with the foundation for which we've created our recommendations and identified what our needs are for the future. Once we've identified what our needs are for the future, then the plan goes into establishing what our future needs are and the strategies that we need to put in place in order to accomplish those needs. So I'm going to review a little bit about the process. Like I said, there was a discussion with the borough, with staff and the elected and appointed officials about the type of comprehensive plan we wanted to implement. There was lots of community outreach, and yeah, I'll just keep going from here. So the very first thing that we talked about with regards to Columbia 2040 was what kind of comprehensive plan do we want this to be? And there are two schools of thought. There is the traditional comprehensive plan and then the implementable comprehensive plan. And for any jurisdiction working on a comprehensive plan, everybody wants the same thing. What we want is for this document to be used, we want it to be useful, we want it to be referenced, we want it to be the guiding document for all of our decision making. What we don't want is for this document to gather dust on a shelf and never ever be looked at again until we update or create a new document. So traditional plans have sort of fallen a lot of times onto that shelf collecting dust. And to understand why that is, we sort of have to understand what the process is to create a comprehensive plan. So traditional comprehensive plans rely really heavily on data analysis and collection to generate assumptions regarding future priorities and issues. And then the traditional comprehensive plan that identifies action steps according to what we perceive at this point in time to be our future needs and issues. That comprehensive plan is organized per the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code and provides kind of a linear format list of statements and plans regarding land use, transportation, housing, community facilities, utility provision, and so on. Switching gears to the implementable comprehensive plan, the focus is not so much data and analysis, but really community input. The foundation of the implementable plan is the community input, which then gives us a list of current issues and priorities. So the implementable comprehensive plan is not so much concerned about what we think or what we might be predicting will be happening in 20 years. It's really what do we want to accomplish over the next 20 years in order to see the Columbia Borough that we want to see. So as such, the implementable comprehensive plan and the plan that Borough Council has before them is not organized as by subject areas of transportation, land use, or housing, but it's organized by the themes that were created or the themes that were identified as we went through this planning process. And I think the biggest thing to remember with regards to the difference between a traditional and an implementable comprehensive plan is we're talking about more shorter term, easier to implement strategies with finer guidance on how to implement those strategies. So we're looking for quicker change here with the implementable plan. Really briefly, a timeline. This process started in 2018, believe it or not. Whole different set of borough staff, some of the same faces with regards to appointed and elected officials. But this process started pre-pandemic with staff in the Planning Commission working to collect public outreach. So there was a community survey that was published and filled out by about 250 to 300 individuals. I think the response rate was about 2.4%, which sounds low, but it's about realistic to what you might get in some other communities for a community survey. In addition to the community survey, borough staff and elected officials also attended about a dozen different kind of town hall meetings throughout the borough. Those meetings were held at public housing locations, at the library, at Borough Hall here, at Hinkles, different places that were well known throughout the community so that we could gather public input. And a lot of what that public input was regarding was what residents, property owners at the time felt were the priorities that we should be focusing on as a borough. Folks were asked a lot about strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and all of that information was accumulated. In about the end of 2020 was when Borough Council, at the behest of the Planning Commission, created and appointed an ad hoc committee to assist the Planning Commission with the update of this comprehensive plan. So the ad hoc committee, along with C.S. Davidson, worked then following in 2021 and 2022 on pulling together this comprehensive plan and reviewing the foundational data. The ad hoc committee itself, appointed by Borough Council, was comprised of a mix of planning commissioners, Borough Council members, citizens at large, and then folks from other areas such as the school district. We had a developer, we had a local business person, several local business people. Am I forgetting anybody? Okay. Just so that we can get a broad cross-section of individuals participating. The creative community. Yep, thank you. Our local artists participated. And so now here we are with this meeting, sort of poised for adoption. Like I said, we're looking at adoption in 2023. Oh boy, I'm so sorry that we can't see that better. So at any rate, the ad hoc committee met around a dozen times, and those meetings were informational and educational in nature. All of them were advertised to the public. They were advertised on the borough's website and on social media platforms. And there was also been some direct communication to some groups. But essentially what we were talking about with the ad hoc committee was going through some of the information I just went through with you, the differences in plan types. We talked about the neighborhoods of Columbia, the history of Columbia, demographics and trends, some of which I'll go through this evening. The ad hoc committee spent a lot of time going through the hundreds of data points that were collected through the community outreach. And really it was the ad hoc committee that did a lot of that heavy lifting to prioritize all of that information. It was quite a bit of information collected. And that prioritization led to the development of the themes of this comprehensive plan. The community outreach, again, just to go through this, I don't think I left anything out. In addition to everything that we had talked about, the Planning Commission and staff also collaborated a lot with Lancaster County Planning Department. We wanted to ensure that we had a high level of consistency with Places 2040. And then what we also did was key stakeholder interviews. And those key stakeholder interviews included department heads for the borough, executive directors for nonprofits that provided services here within the borough, organizations such as the Columbia Borough Economic Development Corporation, Manor Church, Hands Across the Street, just talking with different providers about their needs pertaining to the work that they do within Columbia Borough, because what they're seeing, their needs, what they're seeing for the future, we wanted to be able to capture in our plan as well. So the very first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly go through part one. Part one, and there are two deliverables that this comprehensive plan process created. Part one is the compendium to the comprehensive plan. This is all of the data. This is all of the analysis. And I'm going to run briefly through it just so that Borough Council and the public here kind of understand the data that can be found there and what went into the creation of the plan. Part two then is the implementation guide. This is where the rubber hits the road. These are where we have the action steps. And those action steps range from something that can be done tomorrow to something that might take 10 to 15 years. So the very first thing that we started with was an audit of the borough's last comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 1995. That plan was actually, and again, this is hard to see, but the green is 60%. Those are the strategies that were implemented. The yellow represents strategies that were kind of no longer appropriate because things had changed. Property owners had changed. Something was different. It no longer made sense to implement that strategy.
And then we had a question.
Yeah.
You said 60% were implemented.
Yep.
Does that imply 60% were deemed to be successful, or only that they were
implemented?
Okay.
Yep. Just this was a proposed recommendation. Did it get implemented? Those recommendations could be reviews of the zoning ordinance in addition of certain language changes to meet the change that was needed. And then about 25% of the plan was remaining, and a lot of those remaining strategies hovered around transportation. So there was a relocation of Malleable Road at one point that was suggested because of all the heavy truck traffic and the damage that was being done to the road. There was an extension of
18th Street.
that, but then also a connection of Purple's Lane to a punch through in that area. So some of those made sense to keep, some of them didn't. The next thing that we did after we did the audit of the 1995 comprehensive plan, we did an exhaustive analysis of all of the other planning documents and processes that had been completed here in Columbia Borough, in the Lancaster Intermunicipal Cooperative Area, in Lancaster County itself, probably about 24 different plans. And the reason that we did that was to make sure that we were capturing as many of those proposed recommendations that related back to Columbia as possible, so that this plan was picking up all of the work that had been done beforehand and then capturing those strategies. Like I said, community outreach was a big portion of this effort and was used to identify, the important strengths. So out of the community outreach came the strengths of, number one, Columbia Borough as a location on the edge of Lancaster County along the Susquehanna River. It identified the strength of our history here, our Civil War history, our history with the Underground Railroad, with Prohibition, and then also our world-class attractions. Again, the Susquehanna River, the Northwest River Trail, places like the Watch and Clock Museum, the Turkey Hill, a whole host of other really amazing, historically significant properties. So all of these things these were identified as the largest strengths by the community. And then what we did was tailor then the recommendations in this plan to make those strengths stronger, to capitalize on them, to highlight those strengths. Part one of the plan also goes into history because history is so important. We cover a range of topics from pre-history to pre-written history, when the Susquehanna were here, all the way up through to today, covering the Industrial Revolution. Columbia Borough was a leader in transportation from when it was established along Shawnee Run to probably right around the time that we shifted rail And actually, Interstate, Route 30 made a huge change to that. Next, we get into our community profile. There's just demographic data, you know, it should not be a surprise. The borough's population is slowing in growth, it's aging, and it's diversifying. And that's a lot of what our nation is doing. Our population has continued to educate themselves, though we still have a segment of the population, maybe about, again, hard to see. What is it, 16%? Who don't have a high school diploma, and that's a 45% with a high school diploma, right? And everybody else has a high school diploma or more, and that number has been steadily climbing. But one of the things that the comprehensive plan we'll talk about is how we have an opportunity for growth here and for improvement. The plan identifies lots of information regarding our existing housing stock. Over 70% of the housing stock is single-family unit related, either detached or attached. Of that housing stock, 83% of it was constructed prior to 1980. These are important figures because the comprehensive plan then, we want to, and these were things that were brought up earlier, we want to make sure that we're advocating and facilitating and making sure that people are aware of home renovation programs, facade improvement programs. A little bit, we covered income generation, we covered changes in industries. So lots of the industries have stayed relatively stable in Columbia Borough in terms of the number of individuals working for them, working in that industry. But as no surprise here, one of the industries that saw a lot of significant change between 2000 and now is the I can't even read that. Is the production, transportation, and material moving. Is this screen bigger than that one?
It is.
I'm facing the wrong way.
That's an upgrade behind you there.
Yeah. All right. And just some fun information. And again, a lot of this goes towards the fact that we're creating a baseline. So that way when the plan is updated again, maybe we'll have new information and some of the transportation recommendations, the active transportation plan recommendations will have been implemented, and we'll be able to show that those driving to work alone decreased from 77% to something lower than that, and we saw more people utilizing public transportation and other methods. We discussed existing land use. Existing land use is exactly what it sounds like. It's just an analysis of what properties are being used for what. The analysis is important because it identifies potential development trends. It also identifies how well our zoning ordinance has been functioning. Have the zones and the legislation been keeping development to where we'd like to see it? And our existing land use then moves into future land use. So this is one of the very first recommendations that we come across is the future land use plan. And this future land use plan will then be used to implement changes to the zoning ordinance. So the zoning ordinance is a tool, the zoning map and the ordinance are a tool used to accomplish what we've identified in the future land use plan. One of the things that this future land use plan shows, and I hope that people can see it, is that we're trying to simplify zoning through the map and through the legislation. One of the reasons we're trying to simplify is we don't have these same land use conflicts that we used to have. Development standards, other regulations mean that lots of things can happen right next to one another, and we no longer need to really see that intensive separation of land uses. So what were some of the new land uses that have been proposed are things like gateway commercial, which you can see in bright red. Gateway commercial takes over most of what would have been called highway commercial. And in this zoning district, the uses will still, or this future land use, the uses are still commercial. You're still going to see highway-oriented commercial uses. But in making this change, what we hope to see for the future is mixed uses. And so not just straight highway commercial development. We want to see more walkability. We want to see more walkable retail for the neighborhoods that are in those areas near that type of commercial. The other big change you'll see is with the downtown mixed use future land use, which is a composition of the downtown business area along with those zoning districts that are identified already as mixed uses. So I think we've got a light business, medium density residential district, and there's another one I can't remember. And the only caveat to that is the institutional residential is still mixed in with residential, mostly because of density issues. But you can see in this future land use map how development is constituted, the intensity is identified in the central portions of the borough. And then as we move out, we're going into less dense areas. Oh, thanks. Oh, that would actually be helpful. Perfection. But then I have to do this at the same time. All right, next we get into transportation. And again, this is all baseline information and gets towards what some of our conversation was for Walnut Street. The comprehensive plan is the document that identifies the hierarchy of our streets. So it's this document that tells us whether or not a roadway should be a principal arterial, or should be a local road, or should be a collector. And then those are important because they impact our zoning ordinance, what land uses should be positioned on what particular roadways. Our transportation study also went into volumes, traffic volumes. And then we also, and this is interesting, and I'm not sure how well people can see this, but we also then did, the transportation was a mix of vehicular transportation, focusing on traffic safety, the hierarchy of the roadways, traffic volumes, but then we also switched into active transportation, which is more multimodal in focus, and we're talking about bicycle level of stress. So if you're a cyclist on a roadway, how much stress are you feeling based on the environment surrounding you? If there are fast trucks, if you're on 441, you're probably feeling really uncomfortable unless you are like a seasoned veteran hardcore cyclist. We also did pedestrian levels of stress. And shouldn't be surprised that for this map here, because we're a borough, because we have sidewalks for the most part radiating out from the downtown, there's a pretty relatively low level of stress for pedestrians. And what's interesting here is that you can see here on Front Street, 441, bright red. And the same thing for bicycles. So obviously what this information, these analyses are pointing to, and it's something we already know, I heard it discussed here for Walnut Street, is that we have these areas of high stress also point out the areas where we have the most dangerous conditions. And when we get into implementing these plans, these are going to be our high priority areas for fixing these safety issues. We talk a lot about community facilities. Again, this is a baseline document. We want to identify a snapshot of what's going on here. So this is, I believe, chapter 10 of part 1. It's an almost as exhaustive a list as we could be with given how quickly things change from day to day of the different community organizations, utility providers, borough departments, public transportation providers. If it's going on in the borough and it could be an asset or a resource to capitalize upon, then it has been identified in this chapter. And then we discuss neighborhoods. And this chapter is really interesting. Not every comprehensive plan is going to have a neighborhoods and districts chapter. And what this chapter is talking about are the different identities of the borough. So we've got economic districts that were established in 2010 as part of an economic development plan. We've got the borough's police department controlling sectors, the McGinnis Innovation Area, the redevelopment area, and then voting districts themselves. So these are just all different ways, thank you, that we identify the borough, different people identify parts of the borough. But the biggest thing that was done was the ad hoc committee created neighborhoods. So now, as part of this comprehensive plan, each piece of ground in the borough will have a neighborhood to be in. And whether or not that neighborhood is organically adopted by the residents there probably might not happen, but what it does do is it gives us smaller areas with which to work with. So if we're talking about redevelopment planning, if we're talking about community surveys, this gives us areas to focus in and helps make our job as planners a little bit easier. So after all this is said and done, what we came up with were our bold ideas for Columbia 2040, for the comprehensive plan. And this is different, right? These are themes that came out of our review. So bold idea number one was that more people in the downtown and the riverfront districts equals long-term economic stability. And that birthed the more feet in the street chapter of the implementation guide. And that's the truly economic development portion of the comprehensive plan. All of the action strategies there are meant to increase foot traffic in the riverfront and the downtown, and I'll talk more about that. The second bold idea that was created was Columbia as a home. Residents love living here and visitors want to move here. And this was where A Place to Call Home was born, which is our housing and community development chapter of the comprehensive plan. Bold idea 3 is that education and skills training is vital to the financial well-being and happiness of borough residents. That bold idea turned into a skilled and educated community, which focuses on education, workforce development, and employment. Bold idea number 4, and this is actually unique to comprehensive plans don't usually get into marketing and promotions, but as a borough, as an entity who has a growing tourism industry, marketing promotions is critically important to the livelihood of the borough. So we have an entire chapter dedicated to marketing and promotions. So the borough must be intentional. This is the bold idea. The borough must be intentional and deliberate when crafting its future reputation for both residents and visitors. And intentional there is really is the word to focus on. And that gave way to the telling our story chapter. And then our 5th bold idea is that Columbia is and will continue to be a complete community to and through 2040. And so this chapter contains more of the traditional items and recommendations that you find in a comprehensive plan related to transportation, land use, government services, so on and so forth. But all of these recommendations, if we did our job right, should relate to other strategies that were identified in the 4 previous bold idea chapters. So that's part 1. That is the actual document. It's like this thick. That's what's supposed to be on a shelf collecting dust. I don't expect people to read that document. This next portion, the implementation guide, is meant to be a handheld document. This is a working document. We should be updating this on a regular basis, cataloging our accomplishments and what we've implemented. So each one of the bold ideas, more feet in the street, a place to call home, a skilled and educated community, are set up in the same manner, where we discuss the vision first, what we want to see for our community based on this topic area. We've identified goals, what we want to accomplish by implementing these action steps. Community priorities were identified or pulled out of the community outreach, more as a sort of a foundational guide or a back step so that we know these are the priorities that were identified by the public. Our strategies within this chapter are going to be very similar to what these community priorities were that were identified. And then we get down to the brass tacks, which is the implementation strategies themselves. Those implementation strategies, just to give a for instance, there's a section that talks about sustainability and resiliency. One of those action steps is to do a tree canopy study throughout the borough. We want to make sure that because street trees are integral to resiliency and sustainability. Even though the street tree doesn't provide shade on your house, what it is doing is shading the street. And what that means is that on really hot days and really hot nights, there is less radiant heat coming off of that roadway than there would be if there were no street trees. Does that make sense to everybody? So there's less heat in the evening. There's the area is easier to cool down. If everybody were to have complete street trees and canopies, it decreases the heat, the urban heat island effect. So more towards the implementation strategies then, all of the strategies then are tiered. So tier 1 strategies are high priority and they're high feasibility. They can be implemented tomorrow, they can be implemented within a year, they can be implemented with the resources that we have available to us. Tier 2 strategies are high priority with medium feasibility or medium priority and high feasibility. These strategies are going to take a little bit more time. You can see where I'm going with this. And then tier 3 are low priority, high feasibility, or any priority but low feasibility. So for instance, one of the recommendations is to explore the possibility to renovate the state theater. Am I getting that right? That name right?
Yeah.
Right. That would be that's a tier 3 strategy. That's a longer term strategy. It may not be a priority right now, but it could become a more intense priority later on. And then the implementation strategies themselves are different. Some of them are going to be one-offs. They're standalone. You can implement it on its own. Others are going to be multi-year efforts where you've got to do this one first, then the next, and it follows the procedure. Okay. So more feet in the street. These are the goals. I just want to review the goals briefly with council. So the intent of this chapter, we want to cultivate and nurture economic development momentum in the downtown and riverfront districts. Lots of momentum has been generated with all of the planning and work that's been done heretofore in the borough. Number one, we want to keep that momentum rolling. We want to keep people interested in reinvesting in the borough. We want to continue to implement previous planning efforts. We want to increase foot traffic on nights and weekends. We want to support existing borough employers and assist in their expansion activities. And we want to create infrastructure to attract development. So this gets back to what Derek was talking about. Walnut Street is an example of infrastructure meant to attract development and reinvestment. And it gets towards another question that a gentleman here had asked. What do we do about the other houses in the area? One of the hopes is that by investing these dollars, it will spur private reinvestment where you'll see an increase in maintenance, or you'll see turnover. Property selling to individuals then that have the ability to maintain them. The implementation strategies, and there are a lot of action steps. I'm only going through the very high level areas of where the action steps are. The plan is, the council has electronic copies of the plan, and then the public can see the plan, can access it on the website. But so, for more feet in the street, the first implementation strategy is the creation of a Lancaster Avenue district. And so, this map here identifies the 3 existing economic districts of the riverfront, the downtown, and historic preservation. Now what we're proposing is a district here that will implement place-based planning initiatives. So a lot like what Derek talked about, we want the best way a municipality can elicit positive change is by sticking to what they do best, which is infrastructure. So we want to talk about redoing sidewalks. We want to talk about improving access, bike lanes, landscaping. These are all place-based planning initiatives that are easily doable for the community. They're within our purview. They're within our sort of ballpark, and they create positive change. We also want to consider in the Lancaster Avenue Planning District modifying the zoning ordinance so that we can make sure that we're encouraging neighborhood commercial development, we're encouraging some mixed-use development, and some walkable retail. We want to make sure that these residents in the Lancaster Avenue area don't feel disconnected from the rest of the borough, and that there are amenities and resources on their side of Shawnee Run, and not just in the downtown area. Other strategies include making public parking a priority supportive service. So that means we're talking about wayfinding. We're talking about some of the longer term strategies are just what was mentioned here. We're talking about permit parking programs and exploring those permit parking programs, residential permit parking programs.
Ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah.
Now that you mentioned about parking, public parking, what about some of the small businesses in Columbia that I'll give you an example, Schultz Barber Shop. Okay, he probably gets 5-6 tickets a week. I mean,
He himself or his clients?
he himself, because he doesn't have a place to park, so he has to park on the street. So what about just uprooting the meter and giving him a place to park? He has clientele from Columbia coming to him to park.
So the comprehensive plan is a much larger in scope document. So what you were talking about, I would call like a 100-foot view, and the comprehensive plan is more like a 10,000-foot view. So while we may not cover that particular instance, because that's very fine-tuned, micro-focused to one individual, what we are talking about those exploring opportunities for shared parking and exploring the development of programs that maybe would help move parking and increase that turnover and make the parking more available.
And I've also heard of people saying about the Kettle Works, people come from out of town to go to the Kettle Works. Like on Saturday, and you got the meter guy walking around, they go in there and spend $5 for a beer and come outside and got a $25 fine on their car.
Yep.
So that deters some people from coming into town to go to small business or whatever have you.
Yep, absolutely. So this section, and I'm only very briefly getting into it, but really what this parking as a priority supportive service is making sure that we're making parking a business. So that we know that parking is one of the things that drives economic development and is the difference between people being here and not being here. And all of the strategies within this section are geared towards making parking that
Most Fargo building would be a perfect parking garage.
that supportive service.
That would be a business.
Next, we get into creating a walkable Columbia Borough. We're talking about prioritizing streetscape improvements. We're talking about adopting development standards, establishing a public art program, and we already heard it here this evening, creating gateways. So we talk about the Walnut Street gateway, the need for a gateway there. We talk about the need for a gateway at Lancaster, on Lancaster Avenue at Gladfelter Fields. We talk about the need for a gateway over at Linden Street coming off of Interstate 30. We also get into, for more feet in the street, encouraging historic, cultural, and recreation-oriented tourism. There are a bunch of recommendations there. And then attracting and retaining business and development. And this gets into really establishing business retention and expansion task force entities, where we have individuals who are coordinating with our employers, identifying what their needs and struggles are, and seeing if there's something within our purview that we can change or implement to make sure that they stay here, to make sure that they continue employing individuals, and to make sure that they're expanding. The next section we get into is a place to call home. The goals here, we want to encourage and increase home ownership. We want to improve and preserve the borough's existing housing stock. We want to ensure the provision of affordable housing. And probably most importantly, we want to build neighborhood capacity. And building neighborhood capacity can be really easily explained by just making sure that everybody has an active neighborhood association or group that they can go to for assistance and conversations. That's the capacity that we're talking about. We're talking about creating greater housing choice through making zoning changes. Historically, zoning ordinances have been used to really restrict housing development to single-family homes. We're talking, the comprehensive plan is making recommendations that will allow the development of middle housing. So we're more duplexes, more triplexes, more quad units. Everything that fits and looks and fits the pedestrian scale of a neighborhood. So the building isn't out of sorts. It looks like a single family home, but within that structure, there are multiple units. And one of the reasons we want to encourage this is for sustainability. We've got folks on fixed incomes, we've got young families, we've got young professionals, we've got a host of all sorts of residents who need a very type of housing unit in order for them to live their best lives and not be over or underhoused. We talk about strategies to encourage and increase homeownership, things like down payment programs, working with community partners like Tenfold, thank you, like Tenfold, to make sure that residents, future property owners understand that there are down payment assistance programs and housing counseling that can help them get to where they'd like to be. And we want to ensure that there's a constant provision of affordable housing. After housing, we get into a skilled and educated community. And as it sounds, this is where we want to make sure these are recommendations and action steps to ensure that we are working with folks to make sure that they are connected to public transportation, so they have transportation to get to, skills training to get to increased education. These are strategies like increasing access to post-secondary schooling resources, grant funding, other educational programs that might be providing skills training, and then increasing access to workforce development resources. So within this plan, the plan recommends the establishment of either a county or a borough-based workforce development task force. So essentially, we're saying we need employers in and around Columbia Borough to be meeting on a regular basis, talking about the workforce development issues and needs that they have, and then identifying partners in the county who can help them create that development, that training necessary for them to have the skilled workforce they need. And we want to have it here in Columbia Borough. After a skilled and educated community, we get into telling our story. And this is all about Columbia Borough being an active participant, driving their own narrative, making sure that the conversations that are happening about Columbia Borough are the positive conversations about the really great things that are happening in the borough. And the best way to do that is for us to be telling that story ourselves actively in the community. So this section of the comprehensive plan recommends the establishment of a marketing committee, the creation of a universal branding strategy, the creation of digital marketing documents so that everything's uniform. We have one message, we have one brand, we are communicating as one out into the community. That will help all of our tourism generation and help appropriately communicate the amenities and opportunities for those who are not in Columbia Borough but should be. So this section focuses on growing the tourism economy and creating community pride. And then we get to the last section, but certainly not least, I think this is the biggest section, is growing and sustaining a complete community. And those focus areas are transportation, public safety, recreation, community health, code compliance, government administration, and sustainability and resilience. E, it should be resilience E. So again, these are recommendations that are geared towards the borough sort of administration and staff and elected and appointed officials. But we want to make sure that we're implementing all of our design standards. So we've got the work going on with Walnut Street. We want to make sure that those design standards that are generated from that Walnut Street program are adopted and implemented in the borough across the board. We want to prioritize gateway improvements, and a lot of this stuff should sound like repeat, because it is, because these are more than likely recommendations that have already been made in one of the other 4 chapters, but we're including it in here because there are action steps that need to be implemented by staff and others in order to accomplish this. Public safety, we talk about having the police force working more closely with code compliance so that we're matching resources and we're working in the same target neighborhoods. So while the police are looking to crack down on unlawful behavior, code compliance is also looking to crack down on property maintenance issues. So we're working 2 parts of sort of the same coin to make that area better. We have recreation recommendations, such as updating the borough's comprehensive recreation plan, updating the river park plan. We also talk about community health and community health initiatives. Lots of those borough-wide greening and landscaping to make this a sort of a prettier, cool, and when I say cooler, I don't mean cool like, wow man, that's cool. I mean legitimately cooler, temperature-wise, cooler borough. Encouraging the development of things like controlled environmental agriculture, which is a really cool idea, where your agriculture is not being grown out in the field, it's hydroponic and vertical. And so that way we want to make sure that our zoning ordinance is encouraging the development of those types of uses, which creates sustainability and resiliency for our community. It means we have our fresh fruit growing here in the borough, not somewhere outside the borough. We have code compliance suggestions, increasing capacity for code compliance so that we can get ourselves to a proactive level of compliance. And then recommendations for government administration, such as developing long-range fiscal plans, financial plans, updating the official map for historic preservation purposes and for multimodal corridor improvements. And then we get into sustainability and resiliency. And this is a new section. These are new components to comprehensive plans, but everybody will be required. So this portion of the comprehensive plan makes recommendations with regards to maintaining air quality, water quality, habitat preservation. We're talking about emergency management and emergency preparedness in this portion of the plan. And that, in a nutshell, is Columbia 2040, which is scheduled for adoption in September of 2023. And I would be happy to take questions.
So, just a quick question. Thank you for putting this together. It's very elaborate and seems like it was well thought out. So, data and analysis seemed to be was the first slide that you had, and I'm wondering if you have projections on what the tangible benefit that each of these incentives would bring in.
No.
Do you think that that's something that you will have eventually?
No.
No.
No, because one of the goals of the comprehensive plan is we want to be, again, like it says, comprehensive, kind of try and leave no stone unturned. This document is identifying potential priorities. These are priorities that may never come to fruition. You need public will, you need resources, you need a whole host of different kind of things to fall into place in order to get certain implementation steps off the ground. So it's hard to be able to predict now what of these strategies will reach implementation.
Okay, so hypothetically, I'm sorry, were you going to keep going? I didn't.
No.
Okay, so the tier ones, I'm assuming that those would get, at least some of them would have to be completed at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so for the tier ones, do you have any data that would put a number as to what sort of value this would actually be?
And I guess I would throw a question back to you is what's value to you?
I would say as far as income that can be generated by improving the structure of the community.
So I think you're going right. I think it's a good question. I think the value of doing this level of a comprehensive plan is when we decide we're going to take on a project. Then we use the plan as a catalyst to say, okay, let's look at the cost benefit, if you will, and the return on investment of that individual project. So that would be something, if we deem it necessary for an individual project, we would do that based on some of the information here, and based on the purpose of that project. Then that might be a good thing to do.
Right, so I mean, I'm just looking at it through a bit of a corporate lens, I suppose. So even if it's not financially related, you could maybe do a study on happiness. And so let's say these things are in different communities, let's say Chicago has some of these things, what percentage of the citizens say that this made their life better? So you could do projections based on that.
I think some goals absolutely would benefit from that, other ones I don't think is necessary. So I think even on a case-by-case basis to look at that, yes.
But I would also say though I understand what you're saying. I don't know that that's the role of a comprehensive plan. So that would be a further step of, so right now what we're trying to do is identify sort of the suite of action steps that we can use in order to make Columbia the place that we want it to be in 2040. Further analysis like what you're talking about then needs to be done by the Planning Commission and others in order to say, all right, does the cost benefit, like Mark said, is this going to make sense? Is this going to accomplish what we hope it will accomplish?
Mr. Jeff, have you driven Route 462 going east out of Columbia?
Yeah.
Is there any way this plan could do something to get us a better street in town? This is a straight street, a state road. It's has state inspectors that our tax dollars are paying for it. How would this plan help us see that this doesn't happen again?
So it's a great question. What this plan is supporting is walkability, is increased safety. Those are all priorities that can be applied to 462. And we have, in this plan, have identified corridor improvements for 462 that have been identified by others. If those plans are implemented, then I think you'll see a safer 462. If they're not, and like I said, it takes a whole host of other things to fall into place.
We got nowhere to go. We've exhausted every place to try and get it done. But we have to put up with it. Here, we're doing all our infrastructure, we're getting all our work done, but yet the state just lets this happen.
Yeah, I wish we could do more out there, Frank, but I can tell you that's one of the things we've talked about is making that a focus area as a gateway and improving the look and feel as you come into town. And don't disagree, that's something we want to work on long term. I think any of the gateways, as people come into town, their first impression, if you will, is important.
Yeah. I agree.
Hey, going back to the Walnut Street project, what about if a fire was to break out? It wouldn't, with the way you're gonna construct things and everything else, I mean.
Do you mind if we put a pin in that and get through the comp plan? I'm happy to answer your question, but I don't want to take the momentum away from the comp plan.
Okay.
Any other questions from the public?
When you talk about the mobile housing, can our school districts handle that? When you're taking single homes and turning them into apartments?
Well, I want to be really clear here. That's not something that the comprehensive plan is advocating. And we're really clear in those sections that we are not advocating for transition from single family to multiple unit structures. One of our number one priorities is preserving our single family housing stock. What we are advocating though is for the development of new construction multi-units. So we want to see new construction duplexes, new construction triplexes, that missing middle housing component.
They wouldn't be rental properties?
There more than likely would be rental properties, absolutely.
That's what I'm saying, where our school district be able to handle that.
If I could, I'm sorry. I would just like to say, as part of the County Planning Commission, we've been looking at different development projects. And one of the things that keeps getting cited is studies that show development of multi-unit, basically apartment structures, actually generate less students than creation of single-family housing structures. Because the people living in the apartments are more likely to be the elderly population that wants to downsize, or young professionals that do not have children yet. By the time they get children, they want to go into a bigger housing. So it actually generates less students per unit, per, area than the single family housing does. I don't know, and that's the studies that we've been given show that.
Are they studies done here, or are they just studies in general?
Studies in general.
Yeah.
It's done here as well.
And yeah, there's some here too. I mean, we've had 2 big apartment projects completed, and it's not negatively impacted our school. So, I mean, the majority of the people in both of these apartment
Those
units.
places are more for the business, the professionals.
No.
No?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah, the 2-bedroom apartments and, yeah.
How many?
So, yeah, I mean, we haven't been adversely impacted at this point.
But I think it's important to remember that just because we're talking about increasing the number of duplexes, triplexes, and quads, this is just a housing type. We're not talking about who that unit's being marketed to. So I think it's important not to assume that we're talking about multifamily and affordable housing. We're talking about market rate rental units just to provide diversity in housing unit type. I can tell you that I look at a home, I'm overhoused. My house is too big, too darn big. And I live completely in a different housing type if one were available to me.
Brad, you had your hand up?
Right, I was just wondering if the study that you were referring to is available to the public, or if you could direct us to it.
I am not sure off the top of my head where I can
That's fine.
direct you to, but I know, I mean, it's out there.
Okay.
Didn't the county have one of those studies on the county?
Yeah, probably, Lancaster County Planning.
Have you looked at that website, Brad, the Lancaster County Planning Commission? They have a section there that looks at all the studies and stuff they've done or pulled together. I think there's some of the information's in there.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually, if you look in the county planning website, and you look at the train station proposed improvements, it's cited in there as well.
All good questions and comments.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm proud of
Why
myself.
sorry?
Because I jumped in there, I'm proud of myself for learning all this planning stuff.
You know what? You don't need to say sorry. Any other questions?
I'd just like to thank Barb for heading the ad hoc committee who put this all together.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Just something I want to add, it's hard to believe. I have a very good friend that works at Turkey Hill Experience. He said last Saturday, they had 17,000 people to see that building. I'm going to get with the director to confirm that, but this guy, he had no reason to lie to me. His job is to talk to people. He just keeps, as the people come and go, he said there was many buses to get that many people. 17,000 people. If you could just get half of them over town.
Yes, yeah.
That was supposed to happen when that was built, but it never materialized.
May still yet.
Yeah.
There's no time cap, there's no deadline.
Or give them a place to stay overnight.
Yeah.
That's true. All right, anything else on the comp plan? No questions, comments, or concerns? Moving on. Sure, absolutely. All right. I don't have a section on the agenda for any of you, but I'll go through it anyway. Derek, did you have anything else further for us this evening?
I don't think it's anything we want to get into tonight, but I do want to report that I have a red line markup prepared of your curb and sidewalk ordinance. So again, I was holding this back, seeing as though it's 9:30. Eric, I know you're dying, but I'm gonna hold this. I'm gonna get this to Mark tomorrow to put it in your council packets We'll put it in your council packets for next week. We don't have to talk about it at the council meeting, but at least want to get the document to you all so that you can start looking at it. Again, first flush, first draft. Give me your comments. What do you like? What don't you like? And we'll keep working on this. I will say when you get it, I reference a couple areas in here about a map. That is taken from some of the conversation we had last month about developing a map of the borough and identifying a typical cross-section for each street. Obviously, we don't have that map done yet. We're not going to at this point, but I referenced the framework for what that map's going to look like. So if you're wondering, what about this Appendix A? That's it. It just doesn't exist yet. But I am working with our CAD department to create some of those standards so you can at least see what they look like before we would then go out and start identifying what streets they would be on.
Awesome.
Okay?
Mr. Stivers.
Nothing else for tonight.
Nothing for tonight. We'll start over here with Councilperson Paul. You made it out there.
Nothing, I just wanted to remind Eric to get a question out there and answer.
So your question was about emergency response and fire trucks on the Walnut Street area. Yeah, we'll be, part of the review is going over all these plans with the fire company, the fire chief, and having them look at how they will respond to emergencies out there. That'll be part of the, before you hit final design.
Okay.
I just want to thank you for the excellent presentations tonight from both of you. And thank you all for coming and giving your input tonight. And I may have something else to say after that gives her comment.
Okay.
I also just want to thank the public for attending and coming out. It's important that you're here for these public meetings and we have a good conversation.
Yes. I wanted to bring something up, just to put it in everyone's mind to start thinking for a future meeting. Been kind of concerned as we've been going through here. We haven't seen anything from the Parks and Rec Committee. I talked to Barb. They've sort of been not even in communication with her, with council, with anything. I think as a council we need to talk about what we want to do with that committee. We increased the number of members of that committee based on their recommendation, and now we haven't been able to fill those extra spots. We've had people resign, and then because of people not showing up, members not showing up to the meeting, we're having a situation where they can't even really have a voting meeting because they don't have a quorum. And having a committee like that isn't really doing us any good. We have the Maple Park project, because we got the grant for it. We really need things to happen there, and they're not happening because the committee can't meet. So as a council, I think we need to start thinking about how we want to handle this. I know it's not popular. Is it something we have to disband and we have to make the decisions until we can get people in place? What do we want to do? I don't know what the answer is.
I would just, in considering that, I would recommend that we hold a work session and invite those members to come to the work session. I think the only way we can determine what the issue is to hear from them directly.
Yeah.
And so perhaps in maybe September or October, we can hold a work session just devoted to that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've got to do something. Parks and Rec is a pretty important thing, and if we don't have a committee helping us, then, you know, we need to know that we need to step up and start taking more responsibility for that. So, I just want to reiterate a thank you to Jack, Jake, Wilson, and all other staff that helped in any way, and all of our community partners that helped in any way with the National Night Out. And thanks to our community that actually came out and enjoyed themselves. It was a great evening. And if you didn't come out, you missed seeing our new Emergency Operations Center, our mobile EOC unveiled. It's pretty darn awesome. We need to get some pictures so we can display and show people because it looks pretty neat, pretty darn cool. So thanks to everyone for that as well. And Frank, I wanted to answer your question on the July 3rd. That was not discussed at council, and that is not something that council would vote on. That was an operational decision, and the borough manager is able to make those decisions. He did ask several members of council, Joanne and myself, if we had any concerns with what he wanted to do. We had none. There were, that was how the decision was made.
Was all council a part of it?
No, not all council was a part of it.
Why?
Because it's, not all council is involved in every administrative operational decision. It's a personnel issue, was passed through the personnel lead.
That's something that should have been contractual. You might want to relook at it.
It normally, the holiday schedule is contractual. But this was outside the contract, and we are able to make that. I mean, the union had no problem with us doing that, so.
I guess not, because they are.
So, yeah, I wanted to make sure I addressed that question, that comment. All right, the next meeting at 7 p.m. on August 8th, council will hold a regularly scheduled meeting. Could I have a motion to adjourn? I have a motion by Councilperson Kaufman, second by Councilperson Price, to adjourn at 9:35 p.m. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? And that's a wrap.
It's a Jets and Browns.